Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Thursday session with Construction Roundup. And tonight we are joined, as always, by Richard Silver, Senior Partner at Silver Law. We have Mohammed Haq, who is Consultant Barrister, Adjudicator and Quantum Expert. And bringing up the rear is Mr. John Sharp, Consultant Solicitor at Silver Law, who often talks to us on insurance matters. So, gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for your time. As always, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, please feel free to use the Q&A or chat facility in your bottom toolbar. We have had some pre-submitted questions, so I will throw some of those out to the panel to get their initial thoughts, and then if there's anything you wish to pick up on, please feel free, as we say, to put them in the Q&A or chat panel, and we'll get to those. So firstly, Richard, I think this is one for you. Although the guys may also want to join in, are you seeing any change in the nature of instructions that you receive now that you are, well, that we are hopefully coming out of the COVID restrictions?
For the attendees of those who may be concerned, I'd like to assure them I am busy and am receiving a number of instructions. It does seem to me that the dispute field within construction is becoming ever more busy. And it does seem to me to be in three areas. The first, and as people will have hopefully heard me speak about in the previous courses, is the cladding disputes following Grenfell. I have received further instructions dealing with such disputes. And it seems to me that this is possibly just the tip of an iceberg, and there are likely to be further instructions as the months and indeed years carry on. It seems to me there is a huge amount of buildings out there with problems, and they are likely to result in dispute. What is actually happening at the moment in the main is landlords are looking at those buildings where perhaps limitation periods are in issue and are commencing proceedings against anybody and their dog just in case. What I am finding, however, is that in view that many of these contracts could have been completed closing on 12 years ago, that no one seems to have any idea as to what was the contract under which the relevant parties were employed, what was the fire safety strategy, what's been built almost. There seems to be a complete uncertainty. What's now happening, obviously, is scaffolds being erected and certain inspections made in a few areas, but people really are very uncertain as to what action to take and against who, and whether or not contractors and or architects who took on the design will be held responsible. The big issue is that most of the buildings, whilst they look like they are non-compliant building regs, provide for the contractor generally and consultants to undertake with due skill and care. And the argument is if everybody's done it in the same format, then arguably you've met the obligation of due skill and care. So that's one of the things at the moment I'm really seeing a lot of, is being asked for advice on limitation periods concerning the matter of claims, identifying what the obligations are under relevant contracts, whether it's likely to be a breach of those terms, and ultimately whether there has been a breach of due skill and care. So to me, that seems to be very much a growing market. There continues, despite the case of Grove versus S&T, still to be a lot of smash and grab adjudications. As is always the case, cash flow is key. Contractors being aware, and subcontractors for that matter, that people have not issued either payment or pay less notices, and that there is an opportunity to be paid what has been applied for, there seems to me to be a continued interest in smash and grab adjudications. I've had a number where I am the adjudicator, where I've got to consider whether the relevant applications have been issued on time and whether the information contained within that application is compliant. So that's a continuing thing. The final one, which is picked up particularly over the last few months, is claims for extensions of time. It seems to me that probably COVID has had an impact upon site and has caused some delays, and there is always on projects other delays. And therefore the issue that seems to be coming up is, can we get an extension of time when the employer is arguing that there is concurrent delay? So that's the main thing, is concurrent delay. You know, the amount of emails, what is a concurrent delay, and is this a concurrent delay? Are we entitled to extension time? It is a repeated question, which I've dealt before, but just to address quickly, there would appear from case law to be a very different approach between Scotland and England. In Scotland, there is a possibility of apportioning a delay where there is a concurrency, but in England, it's generally seen it either goes one way or another. So there is no apportionment. But the big thing to me seems to be that there is a failure to properly understand what a concurrent delay is. And just to clarify, concurrent delay, in my opinion, is where the delay impacts the programme at the same time. So to give an example, where, let's say, doing piling, and ultimately the piling rig hasn't turned up, so we can't do the piling. And that's clearly a contractor's delay. But equally, we were prevented by carrying out the piling because of a burst water pipe across the front of the building, which was preventing access. And let's say it was one of those really bad jobs you don't like to be on, because there's also a hurricane going across the site today as well. So there is 3 events all happening today which are preventing progress with this piling. They would all be concurrent delays. But the reality is that's not what actually happens on a site. It may be the case that there has been a hurricane today, but the piling rig broke down last week and still hasn't been mended. Those aren't concurrent delays, that is concurrent effects. The effects of those delays are running concurrently, but they are not concurrent delays. So very simply, when I'm dealing with a dispute, what I'm going to look at is, when does the delay impact the programme? And quite often, it's quite difficult to work out. And also, dare I say it, parties don't always tell the whole truth. But quite often, the record keeping will get you to the answer. There is, I mean, it is viewed a bit of a black art, this programming analysis, but ultimately, if you work from contemporaneous records, you ought to be able to determine exactly when the delay impacts the program. And that seems to me to be the key issue that I'm addressing time and time again, speaking with both contractors and employers and saying, look, this is all very well, this narrative, but from it, I can't understand what is the critical delay. This is very, very theoretical. It doesn't reflect what actually went on. And therefore, I need to look at the contemporaneous records to establish exactly when the delay impacted the program, when that delay came to an end, and thereby determine what is the impact of subsequent delays. So in summary to your question, cladding claims, it's only going to continue. Smash and grabs, I think that's going to continue. And I do think there's going to be an uptake in claims for extensions of time.
Okay, thank you for that. John, I know you have been on and off the screen with us doing lots of things about insurance over the last year, in fact, and to do with COVID claims and insurance and the price of insurance. And we've been asked, can insurance still be described as commercially available or even viable under the JCT contract?
It's a very good question, Julie, because most of the JCT contracts state that you should purchase insurance as long as it is commercially viable. I'm sure that most of the audience will know that professional indemnity insurance premiums in particular have gone through the roof. For a number of reasons, I've talked about them before, but I won't repeat them. There is currently in the insurance market a lack of capacity. There is also a couple of major market losses And certainly those involved in construction are particularly worried about what the final outcome of the Grenfell inquiry will be. And insurers have no appetite whatsoever at present for risk. So there is an exclusion clause now, which is being drawn to everyone's attention when renewing policies, that says, certainly in relation to cladding, fire safety, they want nothing to do with it. It's completely excluded now in most policies. The premiums have, and I spoke when I was in London last week to a very experienced insurance broker, who said in some cases it is now 5, 6, 7 times what it was only 2 years ago. So there has to come a stage where possibly you have to think about whether or not it can be said that insurance, is it commercially viable and available? I'm not quite sure, and I don't think it's been tested in the court yet, as to what that means, but there has now to be a serious question mark as to whether or not it can be described as commercially available. Not potentially for the bigger builders, I accept that, but for your smaller builder undertaking a reasonable sized project, if you're paying a huge amount in premium, can you say that it's going to be commercially available to you? I'm not 100% sure what the answer is, but I'm sure that it won't be too long before this is tested by the courts. I suspect the reality is, and Richard will correct me if I'm wrong on this, that nobody's going to let you continue under a JCT contract unless you have the insurance. But I think it's going to mean more scrutiny on what sort of insurance that you have. I think that in the past, people have just relied on an insurance certificate and a quick review of the outline documentation in relation to what insurance they have. So, if you like, it's a summary of what cover. Well, I think more people are going to now start looking at, okay, you say you've got £1 million cover, but what does it actually cover you for? I'd like to see your policy wording. And I think we'll see an increasing amount of due diligence being undertaken to establish exactly what contractors are insured for, and indeed subcontractors, and under what circumstances. But if the market continues the way it is at the moment, which is increasingly hardening, increasingly risk averse, you're paying more money for less cover. Will there come a stage where it's just commercially unavailable? I don't know. There might be an argument to say that at some point. And the construction industry follows, and I believe, Julie, you had another question on this point about difficulties in now getting supplies through. I'm only going to touch on this, but the full impact of Brexit has yet to be felt. There is going to be, without any shadow of a doubt, an increase in the price of goods into this country. There's no two ways around it. We're not back at full operating levels yet, but tariffs apply. In order to avoid the tariffs, every product has to be wholly made within the EU. If you're importing goods that have, for example, a Chinese element on it, you're going to get taxed on it. There is going to be a delay in the importation of goods as a result. I won't even go anywhere near new Immigration Act and the impact that that's going to have on the industry in terms of labour and supply of labour. Mohammed's much better and much more capable of answering those questions than I am. But it seems to me that the industry at the moment is in a bit of a double whammy. There's going to be difficulty in getting labour in. There's going to be higher insurance premiums. And there is going to be more difficulty in getting supply of materials to the site on time.
I'll just add a couple of things there from what John has said. We must remember that if you're going to be taking out professional indemnity insurance as a contractor, the employer is going to want to know that that indemnity insurance is in place for the next 12 years, because it is likely that any defects in the works won't immediately appear on practical completion, but will occur many years later, as indeed has happened at Grenfell. So most contracts provide for the contractor to take out 12 years PI insurance, but there's no guarantee they will, or they will be in existence to be able to. So that's a concern in the first instance. And indeed, there is, if you're going to get into latent defects, there's a possibility of 15 years. I think the other concern I have is that the amount of cladding works that are going to be required on project is extensive. We are talking a huge amount of work that is going to be required on these projects. And I am being told by many of the smaller subcontractors, they simply cannot get insurance. They just can't afford it, and they won't win work if they get it. So I do see there's a possibility of an ever reducing number of organisations that can do this cladding works. And I also see it becoming very expensive, even more expensive than the past. And there's always going to be a concern about, is the insurance going to be in place for the 12 years following completion? I've spoken to one large housing association. They've got a 15-year plan in regards to all the buildings they've got to deal with these cladding issues. It's that sort of size of problem. And I think it is inevitable the government is going to have to do something about it. And indeed, they may need to address this problem with insurance, because I just can't see the insurance companies doing anything about it. And therefore, I think the government will be left with very little option.
But on the other hand, Richard, there's always a bright side, isn't there? If you actually make bricks at the moment, you're probably quite busy.
Yeah, it's an ill wind, John, that doesn't blow anybody any good.
Okay. Mo, also you've been looking at what happens after the government lifts COVID restrictions in terms of claims, delay, loss and expense, potential insolvency, pressure of cash flow. They're going to be the likely factors driving the market.
Yes, I mean, we are at the phase of the final lifting of the restrictions, although it's not going to happen in June, we know. But it's there, almost there. In a month or two, we'll get back to, as sometimes say, to the normal life again. Now, the first thing I would say, a caveat, that it's not going to be the normal life, it's a new normal. And of course, we had almost 1.5 years in between, where the first thing happened was we left our office. And we do not know where our contracts were kept and where they are. Because many of us thinking that you got used to the new culture, we changed ourselves to the virtual office and already dreaming that we'll never go back to the office. Now, in even normal circumstances, I always found in construction in the last 25 years of my experience, that you, as soon as somebody comes to you to sort of consider or give you an opinion regarding a claim, you say, give me the contract. And 9 out of 10 times people will say that I don't have a contract, you see. And then after like half an hour's discussion, they say, oh yeah, I remember, they say something, so I sent something by email and I've put my signature on, I've sent it back. I've never received back anything, you see. Now, if that's the situation in normal condition, imagine what's going to happen in the new normal. You might get excited that you've got a claim, it's been a delay, there's a associated loss and expense, so we are going a bit dry. We don't have business otherwise. Our subcontractors have left, but at least we have got some claims. But actually, if you go back to your documentation, contemporaneous records, and so on and so forth, you start thinking, hang on a minute, I don't have anything to support my claim. Or sometimes even doesn't even know what the claim is. And coupled with that, the biggest threat that I have observed over the past few months is the number of insolvency applications are rising. Like, what actually happened in 2020 that we had in least number of insolvency applications in last 10 years. The reason being, nobody actually had the time to think about it. You know, it's something like, oh, okay, it was COVID, so the market was down, so there should have been more insolvencies, but people are so busy otherwise that they never ever thought of, you know, everything was told and people were scared and all. But now that we are coming out, the first 2 quarters of 2021 is actually experiencing the highest number of insolvency applications. Now, we in construction world, we know that it impacts our claims. I mean, we are fortunate that the Supreme Court last year decided that you can now even adjudicate against a party who's in insolvency proceedings. But, you know, that's only the law. Talk about the reality. You know, it's a very difficult thing in the mind of the person who's thinking about their claim. Shall I or shall I not go for it? You know, and the other thing, that's about the past and about the past claims you might have. But then John has already mentioned that there will be problems, obviously, in sourcing the contractors and the subcontractors, because it's not only after COVID, it's after Brexit. And in a way, COVID was a fortune for us, that it's sort of coincided like a concurrent delay type event with Brexit. And so the industry was stalled due to COVID effect, and the people were not feeling the problems of not having contractors or materials and things like that. If even getting an insurance is so difficult, or getting more and more difficult, you can imagine what's going to happen regarding the materials. I mean, there's no doubt that there will be shortage of materials, there'll be delay, the cost will become higher. Now, the only thing that comes to my mind is, if you are in a JCT contract, remember that this is a relevant event. So, I mean, prepare your notice and don't forget to send it to your hierarchy. And if you are in NEC, of course, you have it as a compensation event. Now, if you are thinking about making a claim for the period of delay during the COVID, you have to think, if it's a loss and expense claim and you are in JCT, remember, if you have asked for the extension of time as a force majeure, your hands are tied. You cannot ask for a loss and expense, because that's not a relevant matter. So you've got to be careful. And the only thing that comes to my mind, if you are in a JCT contract, that try to ask or find out an instruction from the employer or the contractor, if you're a subcontractor, that they asked you to hold on. So you can base your EOT claim on that route. That's, well, I would have died and be there, but you asked me not to. But then again, the question of concurrent delay, as Richard has already said, will come up. And the real impact, which one actually impacted in the real time, will come into the show as well. So, I mean, from one perspective, it's exciting that we're getting to a new normal event, but from various other sense, the pressure we're going to face are going to be enormous. As I said, if it's a material shortage, the only thing I can think of at the earliest possible time, raise a compensation event or issue a delay notice under the JCT and hope for the best. And the same is if, like, your European subcontractor has simply disappeared, because I already have started getting calls from people that this is happening. This is happening. So it's, the answer to me is, it's a very volatile situation, and no one can predict what's going to happen in next 6 months or so. But I would request whoever is listening to sort of do an exercise of your contracts, dividing them into 3 sections. One, the ones which you have entered into before the COVID period, and it's still running. And there was a time when you didn't do anything due to COVID. And then the other one is obviously the ones you have signed during the COVID period, where you have a COVID clause, because last few months or so, the contracts, it's become a fashion to add a COVID clause to determine the fates of the consequences regarding the COVID. And finally, of course, how are you going to manage the contracts you're entering into now, post-COVID? You know, keep your risks and reality in your mind before you commit yourself to it. So that's, in short, what I could say about it. But one more thing, as we are doing CAP, the conflict avoidance pledge, that's a route which is a collaborative route. You can also try to, I'm not sure that if you are a contractor or a subcontractor, you have much choice to raise it and someone up the chain will accept it. But this could be a very good way out, because when the things are so difficult, you may try all the options you have in your hand. And that's it, Julie, that I have to say.
I'll add just a couple of things to what Mo has said. I think one thing that's clear to me is the majority of contracts that I'm now seeing and vetting are becoming ever more onerous. The days of partnering contracts have long gone, and contracts are very onerous, and the risk is very much being placed upon the contractor by the employer and by the contractors upon the subcontractors. It does seem to me that training has long gone by, that many people haven't been trained on the standard forms and on the notice requirements and the like. I've always been a cynic. I'm afraid from my own experience, the record keeping, both contractors and the employer's team, has never been maybe as good as it should be. But that's what my advice would be, is number one, understand what you're entering into. Read that contract, look at the risk, look at the changes, look at your obligations. And number two is, and I'm sorry to repeat it, is keep good records. And it isn't anything very complicated. Make sure there's a camera on site and regular photos are being taken. Produce a program and then monitor progress against that program, so that at any time you can show what has occurred. It's often a joke I say, not particularly funny, but nevertheless, it's one that often happens. Too often I find myself being called to a site when the job should have finished 2-3 weeks ago, but is far from complete. And my instruction is to try and establish an entitlement to an extension of time, so to assist a contractor or a subcontractor from finding themselves liable to liquidated damages, and also potentially to seek to recover loss and expense. And I always go to the people on site and say, okay, guys, understand this job, can see there's been considerable delay. You know, you should have finished 12 weeks ago, you're still incomplete. Why has that happened? And I always get the same answer. Don't know, mate, I've only just joined. Because everybody has done a runner. They don't like dispute, unlike me. I can't think any better than a big dispute and sending stroppy letters to an architect on a Friday afternoon. But the majority of people don't. And on these big projects, all too often, you will find that everybody has disappeared. So the question is how do you get around that? It's trying to keep good records. And it's to explain to people what is a good record, because quite often the records I see, they've kept them, but they aren't very good. So that would be the simple advice, just reflecting on exactly what Mohammed has said already.
From my point of view as well, if you're trying to make a claim on your insurance policy, insurers will want to see that you have kept good records of what you actually did on the site if you are going to make a claim. So the keeping of records now is probably more important than ever. But as well, I would say, and I've said this in a couple of the EU talks that I've given, read your contract, and there is inevitably now, going forward, I think, going to be a lack of labour in an industry that was already short of it anyway, because I think it's 2/3 of the industry is now over the age of 50. There's a lack of apprenticeships going on, and there is going to be a real impact in terms of not only, as Mohammed has said, the supply of goods, but the cost of those, because there will be duty there. So if you're going to sign a new contract for a project, build into that as much as you can some element, at least, of potential delay. And if you're going to use the force majeure clause, spell out exactly what that means. Don't just put it in, because then you're having to go to court to get that interpreted.
True.
Okay,
I
is
mean,
there any...
just to add one
Sorry,
thing
Harry.
to John, sorry about that. Just to add one thing to John, what John said, that's, as Richard said, good record keeping, and John was referring to reading your contract. I would just add that actually record keeping is probably there, but it's not good record keeping because we do not manage the contract, and the reading alone will not do. We have to have a system in place where the contracts are ascertained, kept properly, and then from the contract, the daily instructions and the records are connected, and monthly plans are there. And these are not just for like a statutory nuisance being created to send to the employer or the contractor. This is for your own good purposes to actually comply with, and actually to reassess every time that where am I, you know, and only then you will in the long run earn some money from the claims. Otherwise, it's just a theory. It never goes to the practical end. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, gentlemen, anything else to add to that?
No, Julie, not from my end.
I was waiting for you, John, to utter the immortal words that we so often hear from you, which is read your policy wording.
Yes, of course, especially at the moment. You do need, if you're taking out new insurance products, although I say it like a worn out record, you need to read your policy wording, because there are now additional exclusions, and what you thought you were covered for 2 years ago, you're probably not now. And you must seriously read. It is the most boring 2 hours you'll ever spend of your life, but good insurance policies can save businesses. Make sure that what you're doing, you have got the best cover for. It will be expensive at the moment, and there is nothing I can do about that. But at least make sure that you know what you're covered for. And if you need to say to your insurers, I'm doing this different project, ask them first. Don't let them escape by them saying, well, you never told us you were doing that type of work. So read your policy wording. It is more important now than probably ever in a hard market.
Well,
so there you go, Julie. I got it in the end.
I wanted to add something, like with John, that when you are committing yourself to something, as it mostly happens in at least for in transactions between the contractors and the subcontractors, that sweet words are used. And I always say that, or often say this, that construction contracts are like marriage, and then raising some children, and then a divorce with ancillary relief called loss and expense claims or liquidated damages and things like that. So at the time people are getting married, I've seen over the past years that when we the professionals raise that, look, what you're signing up to is not what they're saying to you. and they say, look, Mo, you are trying to make things difficult. He's a nice guy, you see, he needs it badly. He's such a good employer. His wife is so nice, and all these sort of things. But I tell you, I mean, time and again, that thing goes away, the honeymoon period goes off, and then a claim comes in, and the QS gives you a different view. The architect doesn't give you the instruction you wanted, and all this starts. Now, please do not rely on what has been said verbally. As John was emphasizing, before you're committing yourself, read and also understand. Sometimes, worthless reading, you may read it 10 times, but you may not understand what risks you're signing up to. So please develop a proper understanding of the responsibilities you're taking on your shoulder before you commit yourself. As I said, like 3 sets of different timeline for the contracts. Once you have signed before the COVID and the Brexit, once you have signed in between, and once you're going to sign now. So are going to pose different challenges for you. So that's what I wanted to add to John.
Okay. Is there anything final from you, Richard?
No, not for me. I think the gentlemen have covered everything for me.
Okay.
Nothing from me, Julie.
Excellent. If anyone has any questions, now is the time to ask. Otherwise, we will be seeing all of these gentlemen, Richard and Mohammed, next week. We have the latest, or the second in Mohammed's new series of conflict avoidance in practice, and we're talking to practitioners next week. That's in association with Rix and Mohammed. Richard will be joining us on Wednesday morning for I Want My Money Getting Paid, which is carrying on obviously from some of the topics we've been discussing tonight. And then we have Mohammed back again with his adjudication matters, defending a claim, and that's on Thursday. As always, if you'd like to book a place on any of these seminars, please email me, seminars@silverllp.com. Again, if there's nothing else you'd like to ask, that's great. The gentlemen are all available. Richard is on richardsilver@silverllp.com. Mohammed is on mohammedhack@silverllp.com, and John is on johnsharp@silverllp.com. As always, the gentlemen are happy to answer questions that you may not wish to raise in an open forum. Gentlemen, thank you for your time and your expertise. As always, an interesting chat. Thank you to everyone for attending, and hopefully we will see you all again soon. So thank you and good night.
Good night.
Thank you very much, Julie. Good night, everyone.